How has your own heritage and upbringing shaped your identity, particularly as a young person in today's America?
I think there is this duality of identities that, a lot of um, Asian American kids, especially if they're second generation onward, have to struggle with. And I think that when we look at how Asian Americans are categorized in the context of our society today, we are not seen as Americans, but we're also not seen as Asians if we were to go to Asia, right? And so growing up in this middle ground, this weird situation, it feels like I haven't really been able to connect with my identity very clearly until I actually went to college and until I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution. I was able to, I think, appreciate being surrounded by people who had similar experiences that I had.
Kind of echoing what James said, I really felt that I was able to find my identity when I entered college. And I think that when I was in high school, especially, I started to understand that there was something going on in terms of racialization of Asian Americans. And that's when I was first introduced to the actual naming of the model minority myth. And I think I had felt that even when I was a kid, feeling kind of the pressures that were put on there, feeling the expectations that people would have of me who weren't necessarily in the Asian American community because I was Asian American, and not really being able to pinpoint that. And so I honestly think that being Asian American has definitely impacted me so much, but I wasn't really able to put a name to what I was feeling until much later. My family and my community didn't really fit into the model minority myth, right? A lot of us came as refugees. And so I think it was this strange combination of this idealization of all Asian Americans as these successful populations weaponized against other communities, specifically Black and Brown communities. But then me also looking at my own family and thinking, well, we don't fit into that.
All children, all preteens and teenagers go through this identity crisis. Everyone is trying to find themselves. And that may be true, but I think for a lot of Asian American and Pacific Islander youth, it's that added knowledge of your family background, your community, your racial and ethnic tension, to not really understanding those nuances or differences and kind of being told what you should think about that is an added layer to that identity crisis. And it took me a long time to really feel comfortable in recognizing that those identities, those parts of me didn't need to be siloed or put into these separate boxes. I didn't need to code switch depending if I was with my family versus my friends at school versus my teammates on a sports team. Those were all the same Deepshika. And, I could bring this really rich heritage that I was learning from stories from my mom and grandpa, my Indian classical dance classes, into those spaces with friends who were from different backgrounds, and it could be just as valuable. But it takes a while, and it made me realize that representation isn't necessarily enough, because for a lot of Asian American youth, you can be put in a space and still not feel confident enough or not feel like you've been given the space to be actually vocal about your own background.
Something that needs to be discussed when looking at this overall Asian American label as a whole, just in that, as James said, Pacific Islander communities, Native Indigenous communities in Hawaii specifically as well, are being affected by things such as COVID at rates that are very different from, let's say, East Asians. And I've done a lot of advocacy too in regards to the Southeast Asian community with the disaggregation of data in universities, actually. And so I actually did a research project regarding Stanford, which is my university, on the lack of disaggregation of East and Southeast Asian data, and how basically a lot of groups, for example, the Hmong population at Stanford, I think there's only about 11 Hmong students in the entire university, but then they don't really get the necessary resources or aid in terms of recruitment because they're put under the larger label Asian American.
For me now as an adult, I understand why, because we've had long histories of sort of xenophobia, right? Anti-Asian and anti-Chinese sentiment. And so they're experiencing a different type of violence than what I was experiencing as a child. So for me, it's marked by these sort of experience of who am I, and what James says, I'm not enough. I'm not loud enough because I'm loud, right? Because good, proper, loud women would not talk about this, right? I'm not American enough because I look Asian. And then when I go back to Thailand or to visit my cousins in Laos, they're always like, oh, here comes that loud American, right? And so it's just like this combination of like, where do we fit in? And I finally have found a place to fit in when I learned that there is an Asian America, and there are these people called Asian Americans who live in this duality and don't have quite a sense of who they are because of the hybridity in how society views us.